and find slaves and create this whole thing called slavery. But it gets even more interesting, and this slavery thing can be linked to every single ancient civilization. Since mankind was created, very shortly afterwards, they either were enslaved or they took other slaves. And what's interesting about this is that it seems to be a bit of an idea that humans must have inherited from somewhere and not come up with as an original thought. But it gets even more interesting when God starts to instruct some of his key humans and
how to treat the slaves.
Yeah, how to treat the slaves, when they can beat them, when they shouldn't beat them, and when they can kill them, under what conditions they can actually kill their slaves. And you go, hold on, this is not quite the kind of God that I had in mind here.
Right.
And so there's the gold aspect, which suddenly God is a megalomaniac. He wants gold, and a gluttonous individual, and then he permits slavery after he says, I've created you all even and equal. These are the basic things. I'm now dealing with some real basic stuff for people that might be new to this, right? And then we get to the winged serpent or the flying serpent. And this is where it gets really interesting, because most of the ancient civilizations, right across from the Americas, South and Meso and North America, you've got serpent worship, and there's talk of a flying serpent, of the winged serpent, of the feathered serpent, and you get throughout Europe and Ireland and all the way into Asia, and in Asia it becomes a dragon, but when you look at the dragon you actually realize it's just a serpent with wings. And then you come into Africa. In Egypt, there's serpent worship and activity. In South America, in Australia, and so forth. But in Southern Africa, the serpent worship thing had always been a little vague, and I didn't quite see where the serpent worship became a role player in Southern Africa, until I found, once again, what Credo Mutwa pointed out to me, the very sacred serpent worship site in northern Botswana called Tsodilo Hills. And together with Adam's calendar, or as I now call it, Enki's calendar, the Tsodilo Hills is one of the two most sacred sites on earth. So it's Tsodilo Hills, which is the serpent worship site in southern Africa, where apparently, according to the African knowledge keepers, it's the creation cave of the human race. All right, and remember that the Sumerian tablets and Sitchin's translations tell us about the laboratories in the Abzu, where they were trying to clone and experimented for an extended period of time with genetic cloning to try and create a creature and a humanoid being that could understand their command and perform these menial tasks of mining gold, but could do it successfully without getting forgetful or going to war or becoming whatever. And suddenly we find this serpent worship site in northern Botswana. And then the other site, Adam's calendar or Enki's calendar, is referred to as the site where heaven mated with Mother Earth, where the human beings were actually, where the act of fertilization actually happened. And I believe it was at Adam's calendar, or Enki's calendar, that was rediscovered by Johann Heine in 2003. That's where the actual fertilization of the eggs of the Anunnaki females took place. And it wasn't a blood and guts and gore kind of splicing and dissecting thing. It was far more advanced technology using transfer of information with lasers. As your audience will probably know, laser beams will carry the genetic information from one fertilized egg into another and create the other fertilized egg inside a womb, for example, to carry the genetic information of the fertilized egg through which the laser beam has shone. And this kind of thing, I believe, happened at Adam's calendar. And this is the stuff that Credo Mutwa confirmed to me after he left me wondering about his cryptic clue for about a year, I eventually figured it out, and I went back to him with great excitement. I said, "Is this what you meant?" And he said, "Yes, this is what I meant."
For the audience, in a few minutes, I would like you to talk more about Grete Mutwa, because I've heard the name and I know of you or very long interviews with him, but a lot of people may not know who he is. But since you're speaking of the God with the lowercase g, but religion call it a one God, but when you look up at the Egyptians, Elohim means the gods, right? So we gave it a meaning of a single one. Why did that change?
Well, that's obviously part of the manipulation process, part of the enslavement, the indoctrination, and the lies. Because, as you say, Elohim is a plural, the gods. So every time you read the word God in the Bible, you have to replace it with its original Hebrew meaning, Elohim.
Right.
And Elohim is a plural, and it refers to the gods of the Near East that came down and created the humans and gave them knowledge and gave them civilization and taught them to write and made them work in the gold mines. But you see, the activities that were going on in the Near East after the flood were the rise of the Sumerian civilization, and possibly a pre-Sumerian civilization that we have not yet discovered. Because from our current understanding, the Sumerians only really sort of started to rise into instant civilization out of nowhere with a full-blown understanding of writing and all that around 4000 BC. But it's quite possible that it happened earlier, and we just haven't found the evidence for that. But something must have happened between sort of 12,000 years ago after the flood and 6,000 years ago for that 6,000-year period, where a lot of activity was taking place. It's a long period of time, and maybe the foundation for the Sumerians comes from there. We need to look, a lot more carefully at that. I believe the information is out there.
I want to understand. You say that for the first 270,000 years, things were peaceful on Earth, almost utopian. But it wasn't until after the flood that we see the attacks on the human race and the control mechanisms put in place. Why do you think happened then?
Well, pretty much a lot of the workforce got wiped out. All the people, all the 50 million odd people that were involved in the gold mining city in southern Africa, the lost city of Enki, which is the name of my new book, that I'm just finishing now, that provides the evidence of this vast gold mining civilization down there. That got wiped out, and there weren't many people left on Earth. So they had to take what was left, restart a few of those gold mines in the southern hemisphere, do what they could, and then carried on in small gold mining operations all over the world, wherever they found gold to be easily obtainable. And this is why I believe you suddenly see the rise of the gold mining civilization in the Americas, probably about 13,000 years ago, because of the geophysical forces of that event that caused the flood, that probably shifted some of the tectonic plates and made certain geological formations stick out of the ground and made the gold and the other minerals a lot more easier to reach in some of those parts of the world where previously they weren't that easy to reach. It's important to also come back to that thing I mentioned earlier, that little translation from Sitchin about Enki built himself a special place of observing on the edge of the cliff in the deep Abzu 40 Shar after arriving on Earth. Now that's a very important little clue, and these are the little clues that are the gems that I find and see if they fit into the greater puzzle without conflicting with the existing information. And it's very exciting, because when you do the calculations, and 40 Shar after arriving on Earth, if you take Sitchin's calculations, that would work out to be around 285,000 years ago. And suddenly you go, hold on, that number fits perfectly the mitochondrial Eve studies that tell us that anatomically modern humans suddenly appeared on Earth somewhere between 250 and 300,000 years ago. And this little passage in the translations suggests that Enki built that calendar 285,000 years ago. And it was at that calendar site where heaven mated with Mother Earth, where the earthlings were created. And it all starts to fall into place without anything conflicting with anything else.
And for the listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't a year for the Anunnaki 3,600 Earth years?
That's right. So if you take 40 Shar and you multiply it by 3,600 years, you get a number, whatever that number is, and you subtract that from the total number of years that the Anunnaki were on Earth, according to Sitchin's calculations, you'll reach 285,000 years ago. And that's fascinating. Now, to get back to your other question about Credo Mutwa, for your listeners that don't know who Credo is, Credo is probably the preeminent South African shaman. He's a Sanusi, the highest level of shaman that you can reach. He is a Sangoma, an African medicine man, the highest level of Sangoma that you can become. And he is an incredibly, incredibly wise man, filled with knowledge beyond belief. And when I say knowledge of any kind and every kind, you can ask Credo Mutwa about Sirius. You can ask him about the nature of reality. You can ask him about the Anunnaki, about the lizard people, about anything you can imagine. And he will give you a very clear and definitive description and an answer and talk about them for as long as you want. His knowledge is immense. It seems
what was the source of his knowledge?
That's a very good question. I think he's a highly channeled individual. I believe a lot of his knowledge has come from thousands of years of shamanic teachings, passing down this indigenous information through, the knowledge keepers, the indigenous knowledge keepers for thousands of years. And as we know, it is not mythology; it is history. So this is what Credo has shared with the world. A lot of this information, and some of the information is quite shocking. And I know David Icke has done a lot of work with Credo over the years.
Yes.
And the important thing is that Credo, well, his famous book, the most famous book that I would recommend for your listeners to go get is called Indaba, My Children. I think that book comes from the late 60s or early 70s, if I'm not mistaken, and he made a lot of enemies when he wrote that book because he divulged a lot of secret shamanic teachings in that book, which were not supposed to be divulged. But I think he was overcome by a deep sense of guilt, I guess, that he had this information and knowledge, and he wanted to share that with the world because he felt the people needed to know this to be able to prepare themselves for what's to come and learn about the true history of this planet.
Can you repeat the name of the book, and is it still available?
Absolutely. You can buy it all over the world. It's about 600 odd pages. It's an in-depth book. It's called Indaba. It's Indaba, Indaba, My Children. And that will give you a very good idea who Credo is and the depth of his knowledge.
Thank you for sharing that. And with Sitchin, he talks about that the Anunnaki they don't live more than 23,000 years. I've always wondered if humans were placed here to live much. What can I say? We have planned obsolescence. When you buy a car now, in early years, cars would last a long time. Then now, they last about 5-7 years, and then you have to buy a new car. For us humans, it seems that when we really start evolving and waking up in an older age, we die. But there you have the Anunnaki